propaganda, manipulados por el dictador de turno y sus mentiras oficiales. Lo que era imposible se transformó en improbable, y lo que era improbable derivó en tragedia. Cuando Caín era buscado por el Señor, contestaba: ¿soy yo acaso el guardián de mi hermano? Y si queremos la memoria sustente un futuro alejado de esos errores, debemos contestar: sí, soy el guardián de mi hermano, de la sangre de mi hermano, de la vida de mi hermano. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Senator Abreu, for that very comprehensive talk. And our last speaker, and we will then take a few interventions and have a coffee break at 4 o'clock. Our next speaker and a final one from this panel, Peter Caruana, Chief Minister from Gibraltar.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, anti-Semitism simply violates the human rights and dignity of its victims and strikes at the values that free societies share as basic and fundamental. Ultimately, if left unchecked, it will also undermine collective security, the rule of law, and the very fabric of civilized society. So there can be no doubt of the need for the law to intervene and to do so effectively. This is an evil that justifies and indeed requires aggressive legal prohibition and zero-tolerance enforcement. Lawyers, lawmakers, and human rights activists will debate forever the perennial issue of the balance between the conflicting rights of individuals and indeed the balance between the rights of individuals and the collective rights and interests. I have never thought it so very difficult myself. Put simply, it can never be the inviolable right of any individual to threaten or violate the rights of another individual or individuals collectively. The lawful and moral interests and needs of a society or of a collective within it must always prevail over the rights, actual or alleged, of an individual. And so, for example, I have never thought that hatred laws that curtail the freedom of speech and action should be recognized or protected as a human right of the perpetrator of anti-Semitism or of racial hatred. Our laws, national and international, should simply not be shy or apologetic or squeamish about imposing such curtailment. Quite simply, the collective good and the collective interest requires it, and must therefore prevail over any exaggerated claim of the rights of the individual. With human rights go human responsibilities. Freedom of speech is vital to all democratic and free people, but its use to deny others their free and secure enjoyment of their rights is not a right that the law should protect. It is therefore of vital importance that countries have in place a system of legal measures and remedies to deal effectively with racist discrimination, of which anti-Semitism is a particularly virulent and pernicious form. But the task cannot be left simply to the law alone. The law can never, ever only ever, I beg your pardon, be one of a range of tools used upon society to eradicate this problem. Powerful as it is, the law should not be seen, and still less relied on, as the panacea for the eradication of anti-Semitism and its vile manifestations and consequences, or indeed to achieve that objective. The law by itself has never succeeded in eradicating anything. Others during this conference have spoken eloquently about those other weapons and tools that have to be deployed. And given that anti-Semitism is ultimately a failure of our social fabrics, it needs to be addressed at those levels of social fabric formation. At international level, there are no end of multilateral treaties and declarations that oblige effective action to eradicate anti-Semitism and similar forms of racism and discrimination. The Charter of the United Nations itself, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and some of these things, the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, to name but a few, these are some of the basic building bricks of the international legal system. At a European level, we have the European Convention of Human Rights and the Council of Europe's policy recommendations that date back as far as 1996. There is accordingly no shortage of international legal instruments and statements of good intention requiring nations to act effectively against anti-Semitism. But international accords are not effective unless also reflected in robust and effective national laws and enforcement action commitment. So every state must have a legal system that ensures protection against anti-Semitism, not just criminal and civil sanctions and remedies, but also committed and effective policing, prosecution, monitoring and recording of anti-Semitic incidents. Sanctions should be criminal so that the liberty of perpetrators be in jeopardy. Criminal sanctions should apply to the use of words or behavior or the display of material, recordings or theater or broadcasts to stir up religious or racial hatred. The criminal law should sanction assault, criminal damage, public disorder, threats and harassment in a particularly severe way when perpetrated in a racial or religious hatred context. But sanction should also be available in civil law so that the perpetrator's pockets and the pockets of those who may sponsor or promote or publicize their activities are also in jeopardy, so that defamation proceedings are available, so that victims can obtain proper compensation, and so that courts can exercise their injunctive powers to prevent anticipated or threatened acts of anti-Semitism. Most countries do not deal with anti-Semitism in laws specific to anti-Semitism, leaving it instead to general laws against racial or religious discrimination and other hatred laws, which do not distinguish between race groups or forms of racism. One clear exception to this is the criminalization of Holocaust denial in countries that have done that. This raises two questions. First, should Holocaust denial be criminalized? There are arguments that you have heard on both sides. Some jurists and lawmakers appear to struggle with the concept of criminalizing words which simply amount to the denial of historical fact. This, they say, raises issues of principle. On the other hand, those who deny the Holocaust often do so as an intended act of anti-Semitism, to cause offense and to minimize or even ridicule the unspeakable suffering of millions of people, and to diminish the condemnation of its perpetrators by right-thinking people. This is unacceptable, and on this basis it seems to me entirely justified and necessary that Holocaust denial, at the very least when accompanied by such intent, should be criminalized. In any event, insofar as concerns the European Union, the matter has now been so determined, as I shall refer to in just a moment.